It is still rated as one of the worst human tragedies to have hit sub-Saharan Africa, a health catastrophe of no mean proportions, only recently ravaged by a recent Ebola virus disease outbreak. Northern Nigeria was ravaged when an outbreak of meningitis hit key towns, with Kano at the epicenter. This is a region that has been sort of being used to the annual outbreak of bacterial viral infection characterized by high fever, severe headache, stiff neck, and back muscles. In a normal year, an estimated 5,000 persons die, mostly children and young people. Annual epidemics usually sweep across sub-Saharan Africa in the dry season, stopping abruptly when the rains come. But in 1996, the worst African meningitis epidemic ever to hit Nigeria's northern states happened, sending panic buttons across the world. In just 3 months, over 109,000 cases of cerebral spinal meningitis was reported in over 11,770 recorded deaths. While the world-washed cocktail of cholera, measles, and meningitis wreaked havoc on innocent populations, some were scheming on how to profit from it. A chain of events began to unfold. It began when a DC-9 chartered plane flew in from the US. On board, doctors from the world's biggest pharmaceutical company, Pfizer. Their mission was to conduct a clinical trial of an oral antibiotic, trovafloxacin or Trovan, which they tested on children in Kano State against the standard treatment drug called Sextrozone. Over 100 children were dosed with the drug never before tested. Many of them were left paralyzed, disoriented, maimed for life, while others with death. What followed was litigations both in the US courts and the Nigerian courts. Cases filed by both the Kano State government and the federal government. One of the law firms which played a leading role in the litigation process was Simon Cooper's Partners, a leading commercial and corporate law firm in Nigeria with multi-jurisdictional competence in the US and the UK. A law firm the APC vice presidential candidate, Professor Yemi Osinbajo's son, is a senior partner. Not just that Professor Osinbajo is the senior partner, he also supervises the commercial litigation group at the Simmons Cooper's Partners. The defendant, Pfizer, the world's biggest research-based pharmaceutical company, denied complicity both in US court and in Nigerian court. Parents of the victims, poor and helpless, they hoped that someday justice would prevail. Then began a long, tortuous legal journey filled with bumps and uncertainty. The world's international media were behind the family's search for answers.
This hospital is where the drug trial took place. Now, parents of the victims are being asked to produce evidence that their children were part of the trial, such as this bed ticket which proves admission to the hospital, this pink receipt which could have been given by Pfizer, and a wristband that the child ought to have been wearing.
We've been told 75% of the families of alleged victims don't have any of the documents required to get the compensation money. Taking part in a DNA test, the results of which might link them to the 1996 Trovan trial, is their only hope. But many fear what a DNA test may do to them and won't take part, which begs the question, what will happen to the compensation money if no one can meet the criteria for claiming it?
A few claims, however, were eventually met. In 2011, after 15 years of legal battle, The parents of 4 Nigerian children who died of the failed Trovan drug trial became the first to have their prayers answered, with Pfizer agreeing to pay $175,000 to each family. In an out-of-court settlement arrangement, Pfizer had in 2009 announced a $75 million settlement with the Kano state government. Several ethical issues raised over the handling of the case, the curious dropping of all civil liability cases and criminal charges against Pfizer and its representatives, who gave the advice as part of the settlement deal, even when the action of Pfizer was in clear violation of the Nigerian laws and the International Declaration of Helsinki that governs ethical medical research. 2 cases in Kano, one civil and another criminal, were settled out of court in April 2010 for $75 million. The families, the direct victims of the trial, were to get just $35 million, while the rest was taken and shared by the Kano state government and Professor Osinbajo's Simon Coopers and partners. No explanation has been given why the $6 billion lawsuits were dropped, with the parties claiming confidentiality agreements in 2010.
Public officials in power in Nigeria, and they decided to bring criminal and civil charges against Pfizer, including homicide. Both Pfizer and some current and former employees of Pfizer. The state of Kano in the northern Nigeria settled for $75 million. The federal charges, which initially were seeking $7 billion from Pfizer, just sort of evaporated. We never knew what happened to them. And now this new revelation comes out and raises very serious questions about why those charges just evaporated.
The report obtained from the U.S. Embassy cable in Abuja revealed that there were moves engineered by Pfizer at a meeting in Abuja to scuttle the case by putting pressure on wavering Federal Attorney General to back off. The settlement would guarantee the law firms quick cash, but the heinous crime against the Nigerian people would go unpunished. It is a well-known principle of ethical legal practice that a lawyer owes his client the best of legal counsel. How much of this duty was discharged by Professor Yemi Osinbajo's Simmons Cooper Partners? As a leading law firm, Simmons Cooper Partners were central to the negotiations. Simmons Cooper Partners are said to have received $10 million from the $75 million that was given as compensation. The law firm felt it has done its job, collected its money and walked away. But the families of over 100 victims used as guinea pigs for the Trovan drug trial continue to suffer needlessly, raising ethical questions of what would have been the human action that should have been taken to help alleviate the suffering of those affected by the event. Could Simmons Cooper's partners have been part of these grand conspiracies to deny innocent victims family rights to full justice, to protect not just the direct victims but also other vulnerable population in poor African countries? Professor Osinbajo is listed in his profile as the ethics advisor to the board of African Development Bank (ADB). But the handling of the settlement and post-settlement issues arising from the failed Trovan drug trial litigation raises credibility postures for a man who has mentored students of the law as a member of the Council for Legal Education in Nigeria. A Sunday, January 6th investigation by the Rested Next newspaper is quite revealing. Soon after the presiding judge, C.C. Nwaongugu ruled that the suit should commence and be executed on behalf of all the victims. Shortly after, he was posted out of Kano State and subsequently compulsorily resigned from the bench. After this, the case was adjourned indefinitely and remained in the doldrums for another 9 months until another judge, Adamu Hobon, assumed jurisdiction. Any hope that the victims and the council might have had as to getting redress for the ill meted out to them soon fizzled out as Mr. Hobon extricated himself from the case, citing personal reasons. According to Mr. Ishola Sensing, there was an underhanded ploy by unknown forces to frustrate the victims from getting justice. He filed a motion of discontinuance of the suit from the Federal High Court before commencing a fresh action against Pfizer in Connecticut in the United States of America, which is still ongoing. Following the $75 million negotiated settlement reached by federal government with Pfizer, counsels to the government have been accused of ethical malpractices and share profiteering from the suffering of the victims, despite the fact that the suffering victims were completely neglected and no provisions were made for their case. It is unheard of anywhere for the prosecuting counsel to plead on behalf of the accused in a criminal case, said Mr. Ishola. It goes to show that the government wasn't interested in securing justice for the victims, as it would get a quick settlement with Pfizer. It is a conspiracy of the elite to fleece the victim, said Mr. Ishola, while describing the shoddy way the trial was handled. The government lawyer, Simmons Cooper, have been accused of breaching professional ethics when they entered into negotiations on behalf of the victims in the absence of the victims' counsel. If you are a thoroughbred lawyer, you should not act on behalf of another person's client, said Mr. Ishola. However, Simmons Cooper denied this every step of the way during the case and discussion with Pfizer. We interfaced with and informed the lawyers representing some of the victims, including receiving information from them in the United States about what they considered appropriate for the victims they represent. The law firm said in correspondence with Next. They did, however, admit that counsel to the victims were not in direct discussions in Kano's settlement case, saying that it may be preemptive to carry on the same discussion with some of them. Tunde Irukere, who we learned actually got the government brief for Simmons Cooper, lied when he told Next that he had never had any contact with the victim's lawyer prior to 2007. The principle of public interest litigation appears to have been thrown to the wind for a $10 million legal fee received by Osinbajo and his Simmons Cooper's partners firm. Did the families really feel any sense of justice? As a man aspiring to the office of the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is that how he would allow such major human rights issues involving the lives of innocent citizens fizzle away without any accountability by a profit-crazed firm? Does this not represent a clear existence of a case of gross denial of the right of the people by those who should otherwise pro-multinational tax them? Legal experts have posited that in civil litigation of this nature, the duty of an attorney or legal counsel goes far beyond the state, but to the people affected, whose interest the state suing on their behalf represented. Innocent children have been killed, several others have been maimed for life, lost their voices, hearing, and some have suffered nervous breakdown and paralysis. While Professor Osinbajo and his law firm smiled away with $10 million from the fatal tragedy of the Kano failed drug test, many of the victims have been left with nothing.